United States senator looked directly at the man who was about to command the most powerful military on earth and said 4 words, "I don't know if." She didn't finish the sentence right away. She let it sit. And in that silence, something inside that hearing room cracked open. You'll see exactly what she said in a moment. But first, you need to understand how this hearing got to that point, because it didn't start that way. January 14th, 2025. The Dirksen Senate Office Building. Pete Hegseth walked in like a man who had already won. The crowd inside the chamber erupted when he sat down, chanting, cheering, veterans for Pete shirts packed into every row. Senator Roger Wicker had to warn the room to settle down. But the people who weren't cheering were already reading their notes. What they had written down would change the entire tone of that room before the first hour was over. And none of it was speculation, none of it was rumor. Every single question was built on a document, a report, a fact that was already in the record. That's what made what happened next so difficult to explain away. Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island spoke first. Reed is the ranking Democrat on the committee. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. He looked at Hegseth across the table and said something that stopped the room. The FBI had completed a background check on the nominee, but there was a problem. The women who had accused Pete Hegseth of sexual assault had not been interviewed. His ex-wives had not been interviewed. Former colleagues who had made formal complaints had not been interviewed. Reed said it plainly on the record with cameras running. He believed the investigation was insufficient. He said there were still FBI obligations that had not been fulfilled. Hegseth said he wasn't in charge of the FBI background check process. Reed held the silence for a moment. Then he moved on. But something in the room had shifted. Because Reed hadn't made an allegation. He had described what the FBI report did and didn't contain, and he was one of only 2 people in the entire Senate who had been allowed to read it. The question now was what else was in that report. But before anyone could find out, the hearing moved to something that no one had fully anticipated. And this is where it started to fall apart. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York had a very specific question, not about the allegations, not about the drinking reports, something smaller. She asked Hegseth to give her concrete examples of military standards being lowered to accommodate women in combat roles. Hegseth answered confidently. He said commanders were being required to fill quotas, that a certain number of female infantry officers had to be placed regardless of their performance. He said it like it was established policy. Gillibrand stopped him. She looked directly at him and said it without hesitation. Commanders do not have quotas for women in the infantry. That policy does not exist. She said his statements were creating the impression that these quotas existed when they did not, that he was telling senators and a country watching on television something that was factually incorrect. Hegseth tried to redirect. Standards, meritocracy, the need for review, but the correction was already on the record, and what came next was the moment that got shared more than anything else from that entire day. Gillibrand looked at him one final time, and she said, "You will have to change how you see women to do this job well. And I don't know if you are capable of that." The room went completely silent. Think about what had just happened. A man nominated to oversee every branch of the United States military had stated as fact a policy that does not exist. Not a misremembering, not a rounding error. A specific claim about how the military operates, made confidently on national television, that a sitting senator then refuted on the record. And Hegseth didn't correct himself. He redirected. That is the moment military observers and former Pentagon officials pointed to in the days that followed. Not the allegations, not the personal history, the quota claim. Because if a Secretary of Defense doesn't know what policies exist inside the institution he's about to run, the question isn't about character. It's about competence. Gillibrand had exposed something that couldn't be walked back. But then something happened that almost no one saw coming. Because up until this point, the hearing had been about ideology, policy, things that could be debated by reasonable people. What came next was different. And it came from a senator who had been waiting patiently for his turn. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia sat forward. Kaine is methodical. He works through a list. He doesn't perform. He got to the last item and the entire energy inside that room shifted. Kaine laid out 3 facts in sequence. At the time of the reported 2017 incident, Hegseth was married. He had recently had a child with another woman who was not his wife. The woman involved in the report received a financial settlement afterward. Kaine didn't raise his voice. He just read the facts. Hegseth called it a coordinated smear campaign. He said anonymous sources had been weaponized against him. He said the allegation was false. But the 3 facts Kane had listed were not anonymous. They were documented, and Hegseth did not address them directly. That clip was shared tens of thousands of times before the sun went down. But the hearing still wasn't over, and the next exchange was the one that reporters kept coming back to. Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii asked a question that should have taken 5 seconds to answer. She wanted to know if Hegseth was aware that being drunk at work was prohibited. Not an allegation, not a character attack, a yes or no question about a workplace rule. Hegseth denied the reports of excessive drinking. He called them a smear. Hirono asked again. He denied the reports again. She pressed him on the promise he had made to Republican senators that he would not drink if confirmed to lead the Pentagon. He confirmed he had made that commitment. She then asked, if he resumed drinking during his tenure, would he resign? He would not say yes. He turned the answer into a statement about the troops. He said he made the commitment on behalf of the service members who would be under his command. But the question had been about accountability, and he had not answered it. 3 times asked, 0 times answered. The room noticed. There was something important about that exchange that didn't make most of the headlines. Before the hearing even began, Hegseth had reportedly made a private commitment to Republican senators: no drinking, not on the job, not if confirmed. That commitment was the reason several undecided votes were moving in his direction. It was the thing that made his confirmation mathematically possible. And now, in public, under oath, he wouldn't say he'd resign if he broke it. The senators who had received that private commitment were sitting in the same room, watching, and saying nothing. Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan had one question. It should have been the easiest answer of the entire day. If the president gave him an order that violated the Constitution, would he follow it? Hegseth said he rejected the premise. Slotkin asked again. Not the premise, the question. He said he rejected the premise. She asked a third time. Different words, same question. Would he, as Secretary of Defense, carry out an unconstitutional order from the commander-in-chief? He rejected the premise 3 times, no answer. And this was the man who had spent the morning talking about lawful orders and military commitment. Something had broken open in that room, and everyone inside it could feel it. By the time the hearing ended, 4 hours and 20 minutes after it started, the math still worked for Hegseth. Republicans were going to support him. Joni Ernst, the senator everyone had been watching, announced that evening she would back his nomination. The votes were there, but here is what the votes couldn't explain. In a single afternoon, the nominee for Secretary of Defense had cited a military quota policy that didn't exist. He had refused to say whether he would uphold the Constitution. He had declined to commit to resigning if he drank on the job. The FBI investigation behind him had been called insufficient by the man who read it, and the women at the center of the allegations had never once been interviewed. 10 days later, Pete Hegseth was confirmed, 51-50. The vice president cast the deciding vote. He now commands 3 million people. He controls the largest military budget in the history of the world. And Alyssa Slotkin never got her answer. Neither did the women in the FBI report that only 2 senators were allowed to read. The transcript is public. The record exists. What was said in that room is not going away. The only question is who's still asking. Because here is what confirmation votes don't erase. Reed's words are still in the Senate record. Gillibrand's correction is still on camera. Kane's 3 facts were never disputed. Hirono's question was never answered. And Slotkin asked about the Constitution 3 times and got nothing back. Those aren't talking points. They're a transcript. Every senator in that room took an oath. To the Constitution, to the truth, to the American people watching from home. And what the American people saw that day, in 4 hours and 20 minutes of public testimony, was a nominee who couldn't name a policy correctly, wouldn't answer a constitutional question, and wouldn't commit to basic accountability. He was confirmed anyway. That's not the end of the story. That's where it begins.